Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. Whether you're watching this live or you're watching a recording of the session, it's really great to have you here with us for this, the latest session as part of our SRA 2024 Compliance Conference. We've already had a whole range of topics discussed at our sessions. Hopefully you've caught some of them. If you haven't, please do go and have a look at them on our website. There's a range of content from short little 10, 15-minute sessions to webinars such as this, getting into lots of detail and insight on some bigger topics. Over the next hour, we're going to be discussing and taking your questions on our consumer protection review. And in particular, the consultation we launched earlier this month, looking at issues relating to client money, how it's handled in law firms, how it's protected, and lots of other ideas and issues around those sorts of topics. To explain how this webinar works, we'll shortly introduce colleagues Paul and Chris, who are going to take you through some of the detail of the review itself and particularly the consultations and what's in them. They'll last about 20 minutes. The slides they present will be available with this video afterwards if you look at the recording. But then what we really want to do is use the rest of the time to get through your questions. To submit a question under the video, you'll see a text box. Just type your question in there. You can give your name if you want to, or submit it anonymously. But please don't be shy. While the presentation's taking place, if anything springs to mind, do get your questions in. It gives us more of an opportunity to get through your questions and answer them if they're ready and waiting when we come back to the panel. So, shortly, we're going to hear from Paul Hastings. Paul Hastings is the Director of Client Protection at the SRA, and he'll be talking about some of the detail of the consultations. But initially, I'm going to hand over to Chris Hanford. Chris is Director of Regulatory Policy at the SRA, and he's going to start with some of the background to the review. Chris.
Great, thanks, Simon. So I'll start by kicking us off with some background, what the Consumer Protection Review is, why we embarked on it, and how it's informed the consultation that opened on the 14th of November, what we've heard so far. Paul and I will then go through key topics we are consulting on, and then, as Simon said, we'll go to your questions, a mixture of pre-submitted questions and those asked during the session. So I'll start by setting the scene a little bit. As you can see on the slide, we launched our review of our overall approach to protecting consumers back in February. I think it's important to say that generally people can trust their solicitor, trust they'll be competent, they've gone through a rigorous qualification process, and also that new firms have gone through appropriate checks and authorization approvals. However, as we know, unfortunately, sometimes things can go wrong. And it's important the right protections are in place for consumers and are working well. And there are a range of protections that are in place when things do go wrong. So people can seek redress for poor service through an ombudsman. They can make claims on insurance for negligence. If money goes missing, we run the compensation fund that can make good on money that's been stolen or misappropriated. And if a solicitor has fallen short of the standards that we expect, we'll hold them to account and take action that protects the public going forward. So, as I said, we know that the overwhelming majority of solicitors and compliance professionals do the right thing, doing good, honest work and upholding trust and high standards that the public expect. Yet the legal landscape looks like it's been changing. Well, we've seen an increase in both the number of interventions and the size of interventions over the past year or so. Interventions meaning when we go into a firm and close a firm down to protect consumers, protect the public with client money and files, etc. So that's the background to the review. And I just wanted to say a little bit about how it has progressed since we kind of started it in February. We proactively sought out views from a range of stakeholders through roundtables, through focus groups, through consumer research, taking place over several months. The roundtable started in March, consumer research ran through until kind of August. So we've gathered a real wide range of feedback and views from more than 200 stakeholders. Included kind of in the roundtables events with solicitors, firms, legal representative groups, compliance officers, compliance professionals, and groups such as accountancy bodies, financial and tech organisations as well. So we've also engaged with consumers. So we've held 3 events with consumer representative groups. 31 members of the public participated in 4 public focus groups, and a diverse group of 39 consumers collectively spent 350 hours giving their in-depth views on consumer protections through a process of in-depth research. And we also used online polling and conducted with around 2,000 members of the public. We also started off the review with a discussion paper, just putting some kind of ideas for discussion out there, and we received over 20 written responses to that. We've also commissioned research into how other jurisdictions and regulators, how they manage client money and compensation funds, and looking at future risks in the legal sector, and as well as having conducted wider reviews of our processes and learnings in light of the intervention into Axiom Ints. As a result, we've already been making improvements that don't require changes to our rules or consultations to protect and reduce risks for consumers. So we've issued warning notices to law firms about mergers and acquisitions, about money missing from the client account. We've tightened up checks when reviewing firms' financial information and bank statements. We have been reviewing and putting in place improvements to our internal processes, including around interventions. And we're really trying to look at how we use data about law firms and complaints to spot patterns. And we're kind of investing in our proactive activity and in technology and resources in this area. So that's kind of like the where we've been to get to where we are now. And on the 14th of November, we launched our formal consultation on proposals and ideas aimed at safeguarding client money and providing redress through our compensation fund when money is lost. Okay, I'll now hand over to Paul to talk a little bit about the consultation.
Brilliant, thank you, Chris. Hopefully from the outset of our review, we've tried to make it clear that there are no options which are off the table for this review. We've tried to instigate a open discussion about the matters. At the beginning, we did set out 3 key areas to promote discussion, and the engagement that Chris has referred to has confirmed that they were probably the right areas of focus. So we're now going into actual consultation itself. The consultation brings out some proposals and ideas which are in 3 parts, each of which has its own set of consultation questions associated with it. So just to go through the 3 parts in turn. So the model of solicitors holding client money. Should we be looking at ways to reduce the client money held by solicitors? Then looking at protecting the client money that solicitors do hold. So what controls, checks and balances are appropriate? And then finally, delivering and paying for a sustainable compensation fund. So how should payments from the profession be calculated, and what grants from the fund should be made to reimburse consumers? If you have a look at the consultation, the proposal and ideas are at different stages of development in terms of the firmness of the thinking, the detail of potential options, and our understanding of potential impacts. In some areas, most notably the change to the model of solicitors holding client money, we would need to work with other partners over longer term to enable suitable alternatives to be made available if that was a route we were to take. We want to work with the sector to protect and benefit consumers. Our next steps will be informed by the responses that people provide to the consultation and our next round of engagement. And back over to you now, Chris.
Thanks, Paul. So start with the holding client money. So as Paul has mentioned, there are 3 parts to our consultation, and this is the first one. So about 75% of the firms we regulate hold client money. Very few have reported that they are using a third-party managed account or another alternative to holding client money themselves. We know that the amount of money held by firms is substantial. So about half the firms that hold client money report that they hold more than 1 million at some point during the year. And the money often relates to major events in a person's life, buying a house, inheriting money after the loss of a loved one, or a settlement following a serious personal injury. Inherently, the practice of holding client money comes with significant risks. We see there can be weaknesses in systems, processes, and controls. Cybercrime, a rising issue, and I know that one that many firms worry about, always heavily subscribed in our compliance conference, the sessions around cybercrime. And then, of course, there's kind of unethical behaviour, and that could be the sort of planned criminality, or more common, actually dipping into sort of client money to cover costs when things aren't going well, thinking that you'll be able to pay it back when things pick up, and that doesn't happen. So we want to continue exploring the possibility of a world where firms don't hold client money directly, or at least it not being sort of baked into the system and culture in quite the same way as it is now. So the feedback from the profession and from the public on this topic in discussion so far has been varied. Some firms have raised concerns, so some were opposed with questions over whether the existing alternatives are actually more secure, the redress that be available if things go wrong, concerns about limiting the service that the firms and solicitors could offer to clients, and whether involving a third party would add cost and delay. Others were not opposed in principle, but did not think that there were good kind of affordable alternatives available at the moment. Others presented positive views. We heard that some firms are developing strategies to minimise the amount of client money they hold in order to minimise their risk and maybe the associated professional indemnity insurance premiums. And we heard from some firms who do use alternative payment platforms. They provided positive feedback, including around the speed of transactions. With the public, initial polling suggested that most were happy with the current position and were sceptical about change. But the more in-depth consumer research that we commissioned, alternatives became more popular as they learned more about what they meant and thought that money would be safer, and even they'd be willing to pay more for that service. But again, it's not a universal view. There are real kind of mixed views across the piece on this. And we expect there will continue to be a range of diverse views on this topic, with much more for us to learn as the discussion continues into the longer term. Aside from that big question around the holding of client money at all, we're also consulting on whether we should amend our rules to prevent firms retaining any interest earned on their clients' money. So some of the questions, can you really say it's usually be in the client's best interest for them not to get all of the interest earned, and kind of important from a sort of safeguarding client money point of view? Does this incentivize firms to hold more client money than is needed or for longer than is necessary if firms are making money off the interest earned? So during the consultation, we'd really like to hear your views on this, including details about how firms are dealing with interest on their client accounts in practice at the moment, and the impact that such a change might have. Okay, so moving on. Other areas that we're consulting on, other potential changes that may reduce the instances of firms holding more client money than is necessary or longer than necessary. So how long client money can be held before funds must be returned to the client at the end of a case? Currently, our rules say promptly. The question we're asking is, should we be more prescriptive, saying, for example, should we say it must be returned within 12 weeks of a case ending? The building up of residual balances, meaning where there's money held at the end of a case and then the intended recipient can't be found, they can't be traced. That is an issue that we do regularly see, and one that we think we need to take action to try and reduce. We also want to better understand how firms decide the level of payment on account they take in advance of legal work being done and costs being incurred, and the circumstances in which they do this. And then this will inform of any further thinking about whether we should tighten our rules to make sure firms are only taking an appropriate amount to run the case without having to regularly return to the client, which would be inconvenient for both parties. And then we are also asking questions around when firms are allowed to move money from their client account to the office account. Is it okay that they can send a bill to a client for anticipated work before it is done, or for costs before they are incurred, and then transfer money into the office account where it's less well protected? Okay, so moving on to the second part of our consultation now. Thinking about protecting the client money that solicitors hold. So essentially, kind of what else might we do to identify, assess and respond to potential risks? So this importance of data is kind of key here, and how we use it. So we'll be asking questions about whether we should be more prescriptive or we are asked a question around whether we're more prescriptive around the information that we must be notified about if a firm significantly changes their profile, including by acquiring other firms. And I think it's important to note here that at the point of authorization, we require quite a bit of information to make that decision, including around sort of management and governance structures, how the operation of the firm will be funded, and the areas of law in which they intend to practice. So we require firms to inform us of any material changes to the information previously provided, but we don't specify the changes we expect to be notified about in detail. In practice, we think this means that some firms are significantly changing the structure and arrangements which form part of their authorization application without promptly informing us. Or they can move into new areas of law where significant amounts of client money will be handled, or areas where we are seeing increased instances of harm, and we often don't hear about it until the next annual return at the practicing certificate renewal exercise. So having kind of good, timely data about firms is crucial to our ability to identify, assess and monitor potential issues in the sector and within firms, and to help us target our regulatory activity appropriately. So we are considering whether we need to enhance information requirements when a firm significantly changes its profile, say including through acquiring other firms, and whether there are any circumstances in which changes should require pre-approval by us. Or in most circumstances, would risks associated risks be better targeted through after the event monitoring and supervision? Again, we've heard mixed views in our conversation so far, with some calling for more monitoring and checks and pointing to what happens in other sectors, and others warning that this might unnecessarily slow down or dampen normal market behaviour, and changes that often benefit consumers and the sector. Okay, so we're also thinking about sort of strengthening safeguards within firms and those provided externally. So starting with accountants' reports, through our engagement with the profession and compliance experts, there seems to be a widespread view that the existing reporting accountants' external audit regime could and should be strengthened. This is both to make sure that firms comply with existing arrangements for getting a report each year and submitting reports when they're qualified, so whether the reporting accountant has decided that there are breaches to our rules that put clients' money at risk. And also steps to improve the consistency and effectiveness of the audits at identifying those risks or problems. So we are consulting on different options for improving compliance and our ability to monitor it. So should we introduce the requirement for firms to submit all accountants' reports to us, whether they're qualified or not, or alternatively to have an annual declaration either by the firm or by the reporting accountant? We're also asking questions about whether there is more we should be doing to safeguard the independence of reporting accountants by requiring periodic change of the reporting accountant. And during the consultation period, we also intend to review all of our kind of forms and guidance that guides reporting accountants and how firms use them. Okay, so thinking about checks and balances within firms, the consultation also sets out views about changes we might make to improve checks and balances within firms. Another area that's come up as a suggestion regularly in our engagement to date. So we are suggesting in the consultation that we take steps to address risks that checks and balances might be diluted where an individual that has significant power and control within a firm also holds key compliance roles. So when a manager can unilaterally make management decisions related to client money, they should not be able to hold a COLP or COFA role also. So during our engagement so far, we've heard calls for this type of measure and this strengthening. However, we have also heard concerns about potential impacts that these changes could have on smaller firms where there are fewer people that will meet the requirements to carry out the compliance roles internally, making that a more difficult thing to achieve. So we are also asking questions around alternative arrangements that could provide appropriate safeguards within smaller firms. And we're seeking views on new support package for compliance officers to help to improve the effectiveness and impact of compliance roles. Again, something that was suggested in our roundtables, particularly with compliance officers and experts. Okay, I think passing over to Paul now.
Thank you, Chris. I think even with all the proposals that Chris has described there, we do have to accept that no regulatory system can eliminate all risk. So we believe there'll still be a need for a compensation fund for those situations when client money has been stolen or has been misappropriated by somebody that we regulate. So this part of the conversation will focus on two key areas: the contribution levels and providing appropriate consumer protection. In terms of contribution, as I'm sure everybody's aware, the fund is made up of an annual contribution from firms that hold client money and solicitors with practicing certificates. At present, those contributions are set on a flat fee basis, and then contributions are currently split 50-50 between individual solicitors and firms. We've already seen that over time, there's been a change in the split between firms and solicitors within the sector. So to match that kind of balance, changing balance, we are proposing moving from a 50-50 split to a 70-30 split, and that's part of the consultation. When we've talked about the contribution, it's been largely accepted in our discussions that with both solicitors and with the public, that the whole profession does benefit from the fund, and it does help to uphold the reputation of this sector. But some have suggested that we should explore various variable contributions based on other factors. So factors such as the risk, perhaps impact, size, or turnover of firms. Our data shows that although most of our interventions are into smaller firms, when we do intervene into larger firms, the value of compensation fund claims is much higher than the total of those relating to the smaller firms. So that's something we need to consider. So we're seeking views on those possible variations of contributions, for example, by the amount of client money held or annual turnover or risk, or by demonstrating enhanced requirements have been met. Moving on to the protection actually provided by the fund. Again, we've had strong support for the compensation fund across the breadth of stakeholders that we spoke to. There is very little enthusiasm for reducing the existing eligibility and scope of the fund. And in particular, when we spoke to consumers, they favoured universal coverage, irrespective of factors such as wealth, amounts lost, or the type of fund that has been lost. But the consultation does raise a question over whether certain types of claims should not be eligible in the fund, but the main focus is on the discretionary £5 million connected claims cap, which you'll be aware was not applied in the case of AXA Mints. This is currently a binary choice whether to apply or not to apply that cap. So we're exploring if it should be replaced, and if so, with what, or should it in fact be removed. So they're the two kind of main areas of cover in terms of the compensation fund. And I think we're over to Simon now to see if we have any questions that come through.
You're on mute, Simon.
Sorry about that. Thank you, guys. Yeah, lots of great, interesting content. If you have questions out there from that, please do, under the video, see the box, put your questions in, and let's try and get through as many as possible. So we've had some in already, so I'm going to start with a few. So here's the first question. Has the SRA considered the impact on firms if they aren't able to retain interest on the client account? Could it have an adverse effect by forcing firms out of business?
Want me to take that one? Yeah, we have heard during the engagement activity so far from that some firms are, I'll say they are relying on the interest from client account to keep afloat. I think there are questions whether that is the right model and a model that we would want to encourage. But obviously, if we were to move to a position where we say that firms can't keep any interest, we would need to understand what the impacts were, and whether there were any transitional arrangements that were needed, for example. But I think the real question here for us, and as I've mentioned in the presentation, is does the current model risk the wrong incentives, where firms may want to hold more client money than necessary or for longer than necessary because they are relying on that interest in some way, whether that's to stay afloat or to boost their profits or to pay for staff or whatever else. And then there's a broader question, less about the safeguarding around whether what's in the best interests of the client. And we've heard from the consumer research that we've done that the clients' view is that they should keep any interest that's earned on their client account, or at least what they would earn in their own savings account. So there are a couple of different questions we're looking at here, and as with most of, or a lot of this consultation, we've heard quite a lot of anecdote during the engagement activity so far, and that's raised questions and proposals and ideas. But during this consultation period, we're really asking for more information about what's happening in practice. What do you think the kind of the consumer benefit arguments are for maintaining some of the interest, and what impacts do you think any change would have on your business and ultimately on your clients?
Thank you, Chris. So we've got a question here from Linda. One of the requirements under personal indemnity insurance is to notify insurers of any circumstances that could give rise to a claim. Do you think there should be a similar requirement in terms of the regulator?
I think that's a very good. Point. That's not something that we've picked up in the or put in the consultation, but I think it's one that we should definitely note and take away to consider. Sounds like a very sensible idea.
Oh, thank you. Oh, that's good then. So here's one. Obviously, we've had some high-profile cases of late. Axiom being an example. Does the SRA see firms that undertake multiple acquisitions as being inherently risky?
Do you want me to?
Sure.
Shall I start and then you can?
Okay, thanks.
I think the answer is we don't see acquisitions as being risky per se. One of the actions that we took pretty soon after the Axiom intervention was to visit all of the firms that could be considered accumulator firms, or by buying two or more firms in a 12-month period. What we found was that most of them are really good, well-run businesses that have done a good job of taking over firms and sort of integrating. But there are risks. There are certain risks that we should be looking out for. So is the firm capable of taking on and integrating the businesses? Are there things like, as we saw with Axiom, where a small firm is buying bigger firms? Are there firms buying up firms that have vast amounts of client money, and perhaps firms that don't work in areas where they have big client accounts at the time? So there are things to look out for, but I think it's wrong to say that accumulators or acquisitions of firms is risky per se. It's certain things within that. Sorry, Paul, did that cut across what you were going to say, or is there anything to?
I think that's okay, Chris. I think part of this consultation is about us considering what further checks and balances we might put in place, what information we may require, and that's fundamental part of this review. So I think you've covered everything else. Thank you.
Paul, there's a question on the caps in compensation fund claims. So obviously we referred to the Axiom case, and one of the listeners has said that the 5 million limit wasn't applied in that case. Can we explain maybe why that isn't the case, and why we think maybe we do need to look at those sort of areas?
As I mentioned earlier, the cap is a crude instrument. It's a binary choice either to apply 5 million or not. In the case of Axiom, it's really just because of the amount of funds which had been misappropriated. If we were to apply that cap, the impact that would have had on members of the public in terms of how much of their money they would have got back from the compensation fund would have been a relatively small proportion of that. So in terms of its purpose there to protect consumers, we didn't think it was appropriate to apply a cap. And importantly, I think from the sector's point of view, if we had done that and those people had lost all their money, the impact that would have had on the reputation of the sector, and that would have compensation fund is there both to protect individuals and the public, but also is an important protection for the whole sector and its reputation. And that's something which came through quite clear in the feedback we got from both members of the public and members of the profession.
Chris, we've had a question from Patricia. She's asking about alternative payment platforms and methods. And obviously, I guess we can't necessarily promote individual commercial organisations, but how will people be able to get some insight and support into what type of options are available, and are we looking at that?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So at the moment, we have explicit guidance out there relating to third-party managed accounts, which is one alternative arrangement, and we don't endorse particular third-party managed accounts, but we set out kind of the expectations of kind of what standards should be met and what should be in place, such as being regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority and various other pieces. So I think that during the consultation exercise and as we move into the future and discussions continue, we'll be looking at different models. I think we set out in the consultation some of the protections that we would expect to be in place if there were to be widespread alternatives to firms holding client money. So I think that we would definitely be looking at the kind of characteristics and features of different platforms and saying what we think is what would be acceptable and what wouldn't. As Simon says, we generally don't endorse specific commercial organisations.
Paul, another one on the compensation fund. Obviously, you touched on currently there being a flat fee, and small firms and large firms in effect equally impacted. Perhaps can you explain why we think maybe that isn't the right approach now?
Yeah, so it is something we looked at, and we're kind of conscious with the increase in the compensation fund, the impact that would have had on the smaller firms in particular. So that's part of the reason we're looking at that split. So moving to the 70-30 split, so it's 70 towards individuals, 30 towards firms. So that would help the small firms on. And again, some of the other considerations we're talking about and whether it should be linked to perhaps turnover or volume of client monies held. So they're all factors we want to consider to make sure we have got that balance right in terms of whilst the whole profession may benefit from the fund, just to make sure we have that contribution principles correct.
Chris, I've been asked some questions about the accountant's reports.
Yeah.
So perhaps a reporting accountant may raise areas for improvement or issues in a report, or may qualify a report, may not. I guess what are we thinking in that area? What are we maybe wanting to do in that area and suggesting maybe needs to change?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. So kind of what we're considering is, first of all, is how do we ensure compliance? We've known from some of the interventions we've done, from some of the proactive work that we have done, we've seen that firms that should be having accountants reports every year are not getting them done. And we're seeing that where they should be qualified, they're not being submitted. When they have been qualified, they're not being submitted to us. So there's a question on how we ensure compliance. And as I mentioned, one option is to have back to the old days where all accountants' reports are submitted to us. The others are around declarations and perhaps supported by spot checks. And that could either be a declaration by the reporting accountants, which you can then cross-tab against those that we know should be having accountants reports done, or it could be done by the firm itself. I think it's a really good point around the qualified reports. It means that there is a risk to client money. Are there improvements suggested which could be useful intelligence? We're not at this stage suggesting that if we were to collect in all of the accountants reports, we would go through all of them in detail. But as I mentioned, we are looking at all of our kind of forms and guidance, etc. So it may be that you could have a separate category for improvements or something that does flag up, or some other way of doing that. It's a really good thought to take away.
Paul, I think one for you here. So we've had a suggestion. Apparently, the legal aid agency have a relationship manager for individual firms, and someone sort of asked, would that be helpful, practicable from the law firm perspective? if it was the SRA essentially offering that service?
I suppose, I mean, that's really a question of, you know, proportionality and I suppose regulatory burden as well. You know, something we're really conscious of. We do have a regulatory management team, but they tend to liaise with the largest international multinational firms predominantly. You know, unlike the agency, obviously we regulate all law firms. If, you know, the concept of having relationship managers to cover all firms would be a huge burden and an increase in expense in terms of resources to do that. So I'm not sure if that'd be proportionate, but obviously what we need to do is make sure we are finding, you know, means to provide people with information and support where necessary. And we try to do a lot in terms of our publications on our website and information, and, you know, and sessions like this and cold coffer to support firms. But we need to look at ways of supporting firms, but to introduce relationship management across all firms would be extremely challenging.
Chris, you touched on before, and I think it's probably worth just mentioning again. We are actually doing a lot to reach out. This webinar is one example, but in lots of other ways to the firm. So there are ways people can get involved, aren't there, in the consultation?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we'll do loads of proactive work. Again, as I mentioned previously, we, you know, the first lot of engagement we've done really useful. We've got loads of good kind of ideas, lots of good anecdote. Now that we've got some kind of more concrete proposals and ideas out there, it's really important that we engage and really understand kind of what people think of those, how effective they think they'll be, what the burden might be. Back to Paul's point, of what the impacts might be as well. So we'll be doing lots more engagement. We've got events coming up. Well, the first of all, consultation is open until the 21st of February, and we'll do lots of stuff. And we've got roundtables coming up you know, throughout the period, of 2 in December that may be of interest. So a roundtable on holding client money, part of the consultation, particularly focused on those working in conveyancing or personal injury, on the 13th of December. And a roundtable on holding and protecting client money for compliance officers, which is on the 17th of December. So worth looking out for those.
And just checking, so we've still got a bit of time. If anyone's got any burning questions they still want to ask in this webinar, please do get them in. So we've had a question. Let me just. So I guess this is a slightly related question on, you know, firms potentially subject to cyber attacks and fraud, you know, is a risk, and I guess third-party mechanisms are not safe from that either. You know, how would you feel about almost a law firm passing off that responsibility almost? Is that a risk, or perhaps are those organisations in a better position? Is that something we've considered?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it is. I think you're right. There's, you know, no silver bullet to kind of, you know, fraud can happen. We will be learning more around protections that are in place, both with existing provision, but also what might be possible in the future as well. Technology is changing all the time. We're also seeing things like the Bank of England synchronization project, where it's looking at just taking the handling of client money out of the process and all together with third parties. But, you know, the payment providers this is what they do, this is what they are set up to do, this is what they're regulated to do. Obviously, you know, solicitors and law firms, they hold the client money, but their real expertise is around, you know, advising clients and running cases, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that there are protections that are in place, things like we've seen features such as kind of dual controls, you know, everybody having visibility of the money at all times. There's things in place at the moment, there's things that could be there in the future. You know, as we've made clear in the consultation, if we're to progress this thinking further, then we would need to do work over a period of time with all different providers, all different stakeholders, including providers and potential providers, to really understand those protections and how they work in practice.
And Paul, we've had a couple of questions about whether we're considering, I guess, the cost and the impact of the potential changes, particularly for small firms, and a particular nuances that someone's asked about is legal aid rates remain static for years. So a firm that mainly works in that area, particularly concerned maybe about some of the extra burden and costs of doing some of these things in the consultation. Presumably, as part of the consultation, we're having a look at the impact on firms of different sizes and shapes.
Yeah, I think that is a key concern and a risk we are aware of. I've already talked about the compensation fund contribution and potential changes on looking at that and the balance of that. I think when we look at all the options, when we talk about the holding of client interest, paying of interest to clients, those factors, we're aware any changes could have an impact on firms, so that it's in our consideration. So again, all the proposals we're consulting on, we're keen to hear people's views and opinions and how it affects those people in the sector directly. So any feedback on that in terms of implications it might have in terms of changes, we want to make sure we are considering those as part of this consultation.
Fantastic. So I think we've reached the end of the questions we've had thus far, but not necessarily the information. So Chris, I think we wanted to touch on just summarise, I guess, the consultation, what it's about, and also some of that information about how people get involved. And I think we have had a question about getting involved in a roundtable, for example.
Sure.
So I think you can touch on that.
Yeah. So I mean, that's a whistle-stop tour through our client money and legal services consultation. Consultation's on our website up until the 21st of February next year. We'll consult directly with stakeholders, including profession, consumers, and the wider stakeholders. I mentioned previously those the most immediate roundtables in December. So just to remind you again, roundtable on the holding of client money, part of the consultation for those working in conveyancing and personal injury, 13th of December, 10:30 to 11:45. Roundtable on holding and protecting client money for compliance officers, compliance experts, 17th of December, 9:30 to 10:45. If you'd like to be involved, please email us. The address is on the screen there, consumerprotectionreview@sra.org.uk. We're also planning on doing some more social media polling, etc. So yeah, the information on our website. As I said, we're asking questions to understand kind of your thoughts on proposals and ideas, but also the impacts. We published alongside our documents an initial equality impact assessment, but we need to do more to really understand the impacts and the burdens as some of the listeners have highlighted in the comments. So yeah, the web address is on the screen and the email address is on the screen. So please do get in touch and continue to engage with the review going forward. Thank you.
And I think for everyone listening, as Chris mentioned, whether you're watching live or you're watching the recording, there's lots of links by the side of this video. There is a lot of detail in the consultation, but you can get into that detail in the areas you're interested in if you follow those links. You can also see this presentation again, and there are details of how you can get involved, whether it's through an email, a consultation response, and those webinars that Chris mentioned. So do absolutely take a look at that. If we haven't had a chance to put your question to the panel, rest assured, we will look through them further later, and we are looking at all the feedback we're getting as part of this consultation as we go along. I'd like to thank Chris and Paul for their answers today. I think that's been really useful, and I hope everyone's found that interesting and inspires them to go away and read the content. As well as the links, you'll also find a link to a feedback form under this video. Please do take a look. Your feedback is really important and helps us in designing these webinars, designing our virtual conference, and we really do take account of that. For those watching live, we've got a full day of virtual compliance conference to come tomorrow still. There should be some really interesting sessions on cybercrime, on workplace culture, on financial crime and sanctions. So please do join us for those tomorrow. As I said earlier on, we've had a whole range of topics discussed during this virtual week. Videos from all those sessions are available on our website to watch again, and you'll find a range of sessions from Q&A panel sessions, and even this year we've got a few little bite-sized topic-specific videos which are only 10-15 minutes long on things like AML, probate, and those type of topics. So please do take a look at those. So I think with that, I'd just like to thank everyone who's taken part today. Thank Paul and Chris again, and yes, look forward to speaking to you all again. Thank you.